When I say I'm not serving a director. I'm collaborating to empower every single child to be as musically successful and empowered, and for each child to understand their right as a musical being on this planet.
That's today's guest, university professor, deep listening practitioner, and elementary performing arts teacher, Leila Ramagopal Pertl, on the mindset needed to keep students at the forefront when preparing them for the next level. Welcome to Music Ed Insights. I'm leadership trainer and former band director Alan Fire, here with composer and co-college music education program head, Steve Shanley.
Each episode, Alan and I talk with national thought leaders in music education with practical insights for K-12 music educators.
Steve, tell us about today's guest.
Leila Ramagopal Pertl teaches music education at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. She is also the music education curator for the Mile of Music Festival and founder of the Music Education Team, a team which serves over 7,000 people a year in diverse hands-on music-making workshops throughout the 4-day festival. Leila has a very active schedule, presenting at conferences, assisting in curriculum development, authoring articles and books, and serving numerous music education organizations. Find Leila's full bio, show notes, and resources at musicedinsights.com. Alan, what was the takeaway you had from this episode?
The practice of deep listening was inspirational to me personally, as someone who lives in an urban area and loves to dig into nature regularly. Both settings invite my soul. What about you, Steve?
I love her concept that music is a birthright. I think that's something that many of us music teachers would say, well, yeah, of course it is. But then I think it creates some tough questions, especially for those teachers in programs where music is an elective.
Yeah, that's good. And how about the reframing of general music teacher as elementary performing arts teacher? And another new word for me, instrumentarium. This one is a hair longer than usual, but it's got so much good stuff, especially for general music, but nuggets for everyone. Let's get to it.
Leila Ramagopal Pertl, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you believe that music is a birthright, and I imagine that in the past you have been asked to explain what exactly that looks like. I am often looking for counter examples, so I'm curious, what do you see happening in school music programs where the teacher or the school are not treating music as a birthright?
It's interesting because if you think about music as a birthright implies that music making and musical behavior belongs to every human being on a daily basis. It's actually, one of the ways we walk through the world is to express musically and take things in musically and use musical processes to understand our place in the world and how we fit in and how we relate to others in community. So when we think about places that don't exude the quality or the value of music being a birthright, really it's every school that does not have music every day for every child. So music every day for every child would be a huge value statement toward that belief that music is a birthright. I think it's a fact. And, of course, you see this especially in K through 6, where those kids are primed to behave musically, but we have music once or twice a week in the schools, and including my school.
And so I was going to ask that you feel this is all the way through up into high school, that there should be music every day for every child in 10th, 11th, 12th grade. So what does that look like? I'm the band director there. Alan is the orchestra director at the high school. And we need to be taking 11th graders who have never played the violin or the clarinet into our groups and trying to help them keep their head above water with the difficult repertoire we've already programmed. How do you suggest implementing that in those secondary settings, assuming we as teachers have the agency and the resources to do so? What are some ways that could look like?
I think we have to take it way further back down into the elementary schools. So that if we're raising students on a daily basis to enact this birthright, to create music, to perform music, as if it's just nothing special, as if it's just something that belongs to them, is almost a sacred act of being in community together. Then they come to the choice of having band, orchestra, choir, or maybe we're in a world now that says, hey, we've got exploratory music in middle school, so now they're in rock bands, or they're in mariachi bands, or they're in samba ensembles. Now that travels up to the schools, to the high schools, where maybe so and so has never played the violin before, so they're not going to choose orchestra, but maybe they've chosen to be in a rock band in middle school or in that upper elementary. So I envision with this idea that there are also more diversified opportunities for them, especially at the middle and high school levels.
Yeah, this is leading right into kind of my next question, which is suggestions for shifting our mindset towards treating music as a birthright. And especially in instances, ideally, Alan and I would go to our principal and say, we're both full all day with our band and orchestra teaching
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities, and our choir colleague is also full. We need to hire another person, and that person is going to teach music appreciation, rock band, and mariachi. And the principal says, yep, that'd be neat. We have no money for that. So, in an instance where we have to maybe be a little bit more creative with confined
Mm-hmm.
resources, what do you suggest? What are some ways, even maybe if it's just as simple as the language we use with our students or talking to parents?
Just around the language of changing mindset is that we're not talking about those music classes as specials.
Mm.
So things that are extracurricular, talking with your principals, talking with your teachers, and just using those words that describe the things you do with the students as central to their education. So we don't call music specials in my school. I have asked for them to call them part of the cultural arts. Naming things is important in terms of how people are thinking about them and prioritizing them in their child's education.
And you said you have music twice a week at Edison,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
ideally the students would have it every day. Are you on sort of an annual ongoing crusade to get the schedule changed, more staffing added towards the music as a birthright philosophy in your school?
In this school, I'm not on that crusade yet, but I was at my previous school, Appleton Public Montessori, where we had a little more room to work with that schedule, and we were able to get music every day.
I had a
Mm-hmm.
feeling that would be your answer, but I did not want all of our listeners to just tomorrow storm into their principal's office and, slam
Yeah.
the desk and demand it. There's a process for this, and there's building the relations in the capital with your administration and with all the other stakeholders.
Yeah, I highly recommend our quick pro tip on how to build your relationship with your principal. It's our shortest episode.
Yeah, one of our
It's a good
shortest
one.
and most popular episodes. So, how about in
Yeah.
the high school? And this is something I talk about with
Mm-hmm.
my pre-service undergrad music ed students and
Mm-hmm.
with my colleagues as well who are teaching. Especially, it tends to be high school. Not as
Mm-hmm.
much. I'm noticing this attitude in the middle school, but this attitude of
Right.
high school band, orchestra, choir teachers who will say, music is just as important as math. And I say, all right, so will you teach every kid in the school? They're like, well, no, I mean, they got to know how to play the clarinet, otherwise they can't be in band. I'm like, right. Well, the math teacher doesn't
Right.
have that that luxury to say, well,
Yeah.
I'm only going to teach math to the kids who can already math. Thank you very much. So I have to assume you have sort of encountered that same sort of dilemma of these teachers who feel that their subject is just as important as all the others, yet they still kind of want to make it an elective. And I think that is more a result of just how things have always been done and
Mm-hmm.
convenience versus some sort of evil plot by all of our American high school band, orchestra, choir teachers to
Right.
reject students. It's like the example I used with Alan and I earlier. Like, you want to play viola? That's great. We're already playing this grade 3 music. You've never played the viola before. Like, I don't know how to make this work for you, kid. I'm sorry. So, have you
Mm-hmm.
found any sort of
Mm-hmm.
compromises or how we can make it a little bit more inclusive in those high school performance settings, for example?
And that's a very complex question, right? Because that's real. First of all, staffing is real. just the daunting idea of, okay, now we're teaching the whole school and I'm one person. The other part of this, though, is what kinds of classes am I teaching? If I'm a 100% band teacher, is there time in my schedule to offer a different type of class around mariachi? But I don't know mariachi. Well, never be afraid to be a beginner, then learn about mariachi. As teachers, we can be on that ride with our students from the very beginning. We don't need to be experts in improvisation and new forms of music in order to get those processes going.
Can you make an argument for why a teacher who's already jam-packed with 8, 9 solid hours of teaching and then maybe some additional lesson planning on top of that should use some
Mm-hmm.
time in the summer or a precious time on a weekend or that rare free weeknight to learn about mariachi or a brand new, implementing rock band into their curriculum?
I think anytime you're doing something new, it doesn't mean you have to keep 100% of what you have
Mm,
already been doing.
yeah.
That's very hard to let go of, but it's something I think that's necessary is to, repurpose one of the concerts to be an all student composed concert, or that this was our mariachi exploration.
This idea of implementing the creating standard. I think
Mm-hmm.
our general music teachers in the elementary setting, especially, do not tend to struggle with that quite as much. Some of them are a little scared, like, well, I don't know how to compose, I don't know how to improvise. But I feel like that attitude is much more prevalent in, say, middle school, junior high, high school, in that orchestra setting. So, what else do we do? How do you just go from here's how to read notation to write your own stuff, students? What did that look like for you?
As a music teacher, if you're interested in sort of, rediscovering that playful self and you're willing to curate spaces of open encounters, which don't have outcomes that you know about. You might know some of them, but you don't know all of them. And that space of not knowing is where that gold comes. Because who's going to fill that not knowing in? It's all the students. The answers come from them. So as a teacher, when you're curating these spaces of small group compositions, we overuse parameters instead of letting the gold come from those kids and letting them define their own parameters for music making. We do need to be courageous in allowing our students to create more, not just as a unit. And this is a huge problem, is that we teach in units. And I tend to teach in expansive arcs, which circle and cycle and become multidimensional in their connections. And if you never let the kids create anything, they're never going to find those connections.
Can you comment about healthy articulation between levels based on your experience at all levels?
When I say I am serving, I'm not serving a director. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
serving a teacher.
Yeah.
I'm not serving a teacher. I'm collaborating with my colleagues at that level to empower every single child to be as musically successful and empowered, and for each child to understand their right as a musical being on this planet, and for them to walk into then that middle school space. That's what I mean when I say we serve in that kid can take that emotional through line of that birthright right into their developmental years.
Thank you.
Getting back to the creating standard for just a second, let's say I am a middle school orchestra teacher, junior high orchestra teacher, and I do not have Leila as my elementary general music teacher in my district with me. I have Alan, and Alan is at the end of his career. And let's just be honest, Alan has basically been retired for the last 10 years. He really is not, he's been phoning it in.
Phoning
So
it in.
the students are not coming to me grooving,
Fair.
excited about creating, taking chances. So the
Mm-hmm.
first step for me as the orchestra teacher is to say, I'm willing to try. I want to do something. I want to be open-minded. What
Hmm.
might be a next small step I could take from a composition or improvisation standpoint in one of those performance ensembles, assuming maybe the students don't have a lot of experience with this? And as you mentioned, puberty and being teenagers, especially, then they kind of start to get a little nervous what other people might be thinking. What might be an easy way to dip our toe into the water in that setting?
I take the instruments out of the picture. Now, maybe this is
Hmm.
not what everybody wants to hear, but it's like, what other processes can I bring into the classroom that will help build ensemble skill and intimate communication and raw creativity that aren't necessarily with the instrument? But then I can tie it back to the instrument. Acting games are really effective. Deep listening exercises where kids are drawing from their sonic experiences throughout the day. Maybe they're choosing a place like a beach or a forest or Manhattan, a place they've been where they're really excited about it, and they're asked to reproduce sounds. I mean, that's a start. We're not necessarily notating, or you could graphically notate something like that. Because then we're focusing on process, we're focusing on communication, we're focused on that collaborative creativity, where the outcome is so community based. We're taking out the intimidation of, okay, now I have to Western notate everything. Which, by the way, I'm not knocking Western notation because we just need to demystify it as a tool. And so my elementary kids, when they're in sixth grade, they're also doing that too. But it's a tool. It doesn't need to be the end all be all. So bringing improvisatory, collaborative games into the classroom.
So, Alan and I love the fact that we have been doing this for a long time, and we are always surprised with moments in every podcast where we think, man, I never even thought about that. And here I am, a self-professed expert on music education and improvisation and composition and creativity. And I'm always trying to find ways to help high school and middle school ensemble teachers be creative. And it had not occurred to me until today that you can do a lot of that without their instruments. Like I'm always thinking, well, they have the flute, they're in band, it has to involve the flute somehow. So how freeing is that? And I'm embarrassed that it's been this many years and now this is kind of coming coming around as, yeah, that's a totally great idea. So what would be an example or some examples of those activities that don't necessarily require writing things out with notation or even playing their instruments?
Acting game called Imaginary Room. Imaginary Room it's something I think I got from Second City's Guide to the Classroom. So it's a book on improvisation.
Yeah.
And you get kids in small groups without their instruments and you give them a prompt. And the prompt includes they need to be in a place, a location. So let's say they're underwater. And what are they doing there? They're brushing their hair in a hair salon. Okay, so what does that look like? And now they have to act this out. And then the rest of the class, through a process, has to guess what they're doing. And I can't tell you how powerful this exercise has been. I've been doing it since 2004 in all these settings. And it's just like the kids, they get their brains together and they're like, oh my God, so we're underwater, but we're in a hair salon. So what does that look like? What does brushing hair look like? They're bringing all these ideas in and they're buzzing, buzzing, buzzing. And then we take turns. And the classroom management looks like this. While they are working on their idea, I am walking around going, you're group number 1, you're group 2, you're group 3, you're group 4, you're group 5. That's the order of performance. So when we're ready to share these out, they already know their order. We say 3, 2, 1, action, group 1 goes. They finish and we say 3, 2, 1. The rest of the class guesses. We say 3, 2, 1. We move on to the next one. So there's no mess in between. And also then when you number like that, the whole class from beginning to end becomes a performance. Same thing with an exercise called Stomp. Stomp has been amazing both in my orchestras and in my general music classes where you give kids sort of loose parameters of here's your, so you have a group of kids, like about five, and they're laying down groove, and then somebody else is laying another type of groove over that. It could be with drums, it could be with bells, it could be with xylophone, it could be with voices, but they might be telling a story through this process. They might be just doing raw groove. They're also layering their entrances and then fading out their exits, and they're incredibly powerful. So I literally bring percussion into my orchestra classes.
All right, let's talk about deep listening. This is another area of research for you. Please tell us about it. What does it mean, and how can we incorporate it into our classrooms?
This specific practice comes from Pauline Oliveros. So she created this idea of text scores where people are essentially reading the scores or having scores read to them, where you can collaborate without having to read Western musical notation. And you can collaborate whether what we would consider musically trained or not. Deep listening is also going out into the forest and listening as if you're a microphone. So taking in the soundscapes around you in a really deep way, silencing your body, walking slowly, but also not shunning loud soundscapes. So accepting sounds of construction sites or Manhattan, for instance, and using sound as a way to define location and places, and also stepping stones through life. So if I ask you, for instance, to think of a place that's very special to you. So mine is my grandmother's kitchen. And you take a few moments and just go deep immediately and think about the sounds in that space. And then bringing sound, meaningful sound, whether it's something you've grabbed from a sound walk or a soundscape that you love, perhaps from that favorite place, and then using that material to compose. So now kids come together and they're sharing their favorite places, and they're looking for instruments that might represent that place. Or if they're in an instrumental ensemble, using their instruments to create a piece which represents the shared spaces. What it does is it asks the students to bring something of themselves into the room. And I think that's one thing that we overlook as teachers very easily, is that, okay, here's your piece. This is how you play this passage. Let's articulate here a little better. Let's dig the bow in more here and sustain. But it's like, hello, tell me what I have to do with this. When is my soul invited into this space?
Let's say you go to visit Alan's high school band class and they got their arms crossed. All we do in here is polish the music, thank you. And we're good at that. We don't do any of this, hippie stuff, lighting incense and
Yeah, the
thinking
woo-woo.
about that. So how are you going to win over Alan's band quickly with like a first deep listening exercise or experiment? I'm really picking on Alan a lot today and his
Yeah, poor
his
Alan.
poor teaching. Yes.
So useless.
Alan, get with it.
Just
I might ask them to do something really fairly easy, and that is to picture a forest, and maybe a forest that comes up against an ocean, and just imagine what that sounds like. And then just bring everybody in with an improvisational soundscape. So, and I would ask them, we're going to create the soundscape of this forest next to an ocean, but you need to listen 75% of the time and play 25% of the time. So we're training that listening as well. We're not just all blasting wide open.
Yeah, I love that parameter. Instead of let's use the first 5 notes of the B flat scale, mostly 8 notes or whatever, the parameter is listen. And I like how you say listen instead of don't play for 75% of the time, play for 25% of the time. Because don't listen, I feel like sort of invites inaction and not thinking. Whereas listening is you're doing something and also not playing.
Jumping in like that can be really difficult. So as the teacher, you're going to bring an instrument with you and you're going to help model what something might sound like, or what my interpretation of a cardinal in a tree on a windy day sounds like. But it's not so much about that imagery and what's coming out of the end of my instrument, because now we're already thinking, okay, how am I going to get this right? So that space has to be curated in such a way that We have open possibilities, but it's more about what happens in between that. What is the student thinking in that moment? We're not often in their brains, right? So that's kind of a sacred space. And you may never be in that sacred space. And in a sense, when my students are co-collaborating in small groups in my classroom, in my very busy, noisy classroom, I'm often just looking around and I'm listening to this gorgeous conversation, but I make the choice not to step in sometimes, well, quite a bit of time, because that's a community. It's a sacred community of shared ideas, and I don't want to get into that. The irony is that if you give kids that space, whether it's they're sitting in their band chair and they're thinking privately to themselves, how am I going to produce this? What am I doing? The more they're going to give you all around, all together, because there are several opportunities for that personal soul to connect to the act of music making.
Kind of a theme so far in our discussion is that you are very okay with sounds and an atmosphere in your classroom that other people might interpret as not orderly. Is that correct? Would you say that you're at a pretty far end of the continuum in terms of as long as what they are doing is creative and they're excited about music? Yep, I'm going to put up with a little bit of ancillary noise.
Yes, I would say that I'm definitely at the far end of that. But people are in my district that have been able to see the product of that. They're like, okay, I am seeing this now.
It's worth it.
Um, it's so worth it.
You seem like someone who would be very sensitive to the diversity of students. How do you attend to those who have some sensory sensitivities, who can be overwhelmed?
Not all soundscapes have to be noisy. They can be full of very quiet sound. So sometimes I'm specifically asking for piano, pianissimo, pianissimo, gentle sounds, or we're choosing soundscapes that are rippling, bubbling, something not loud. And in that case, you're curating their choice of instruments a little bit. And we do have decibel removing headphones. So every child, especially when we're doing our drumming, which is interesting because I do have kids with these sensory issues. In no case have I ever had a kid who, with headphones on, does not want to participate in the drumming. And that seems to be especially enjoyed by the kids with the sensory issues.
That is really interesting to note.
But you think about it. I mean, Alan, have you ever encountered a second grader who didn't want to drum on something or see an instrument and want to play it?
No, I haven't, but I have seen students with decibel canceling headphones and make the mistaken assumption that they don't want to do anything that makes noise.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate hearing.
Yeah, these small groups allow for, what Maxine Green calls these unheard frequencies, and the curation of open encountered events that, in terms of being inclusive and allowing for diversity, we often think that means diversifying repertoire. And of course, it means that. But the thing we overlook are the 30 resources in front of us or 100 resources in front of us. What better place to start with diversity than the unique individuals and their histories and ideas? And so if we are curating these spaces of open encounters, these kids are getting to hear the ideas of their peers. They're understanding that their value is invited and their value is desired in that space. So it has the natural benefit and result of breeding compassion and empathetic humans. And so if you watch my classrooms, especially in performance, they are powerful. They help one another. They've learned to listen and kind of vibe with one another because their voices have been heard. And because their voices have been heard, they understand how important it is to allow space for others.
So you mentioned the performances that you give in the elementary setting. We were fortunate to interview Doug Goodkin a few weeks ago. And did you see the IPTV documentary about him?
I didn't, sadly, not yet.
We were kind of helping him promote that. And one of the things that I was knocked out with is there were some performances and they were by my, trained high school band director. I need to go win and get a Division I. By my standards, they were clean. I mean, they were good,
Mm-hmm.
unified sense of pulse, good technique. I mean, everything was outstanding. And one of the things I
Yep.
was excited to ask him about was I feel like in general music, we sort of have this. I feel like a false dichotomy that in general music, it's whatever goes. We're going to have a cutesy second grade program and whatever happens, happens. And then in high school, that's when we're going to really polish it. And I asked him, how do you find that balance between making music
Mm-hmm.
welcoming and not
Yep.
scary, but also, wow, getting it so performance, such a
Yeah.
nice performance? Where do you weigh in on that?
My thoughts are the more you're doing the things I'm talking about, the better the technique and the skills and the performances are. They're invested because they're invited into that room so much to as themselves. That is not loosey goosey. Everything is just noisy and it's a mess. It's the exact opposite. They know how to organize themselves so well musically through these deep listening processes, through these acting communication processes, which they bring right into every single one of their musical skills, whether it's singing, drumming, using the xylophones, but particularly in these stomp groups because they've been asked to create, I get these comments all the time like, Mrs. Pertl, I am so happy we get to make our own music because I really like that I have something to say about music. That's not messy. That's powerful. It's exact. It's shaped in incredibly musical ways and maybe ways that you hadn't heard before because you did not put 1,000 parameters on the process either. I would say to the general music teachers listening, our tendency is to say, okay, you go over in that small group and there's a wood block for every one of you and an egg shaker. Well, why did you choose instruments for that group? So we know the outcome. Maybe they're supposed to compose something with 2/8 notes and a quarter note. And maybe we're focusing on placing a rest somewhere with that instrument set. And sometimes that's warranted, is to place very specific parameters in. And I think sometimes people make the mistake that I never have parameters. That is not true at all. And my kids, they can compose in notation just as well as they can create. It's the simultaneous flowering of these processes, which is what brings everything about so beautifully and so musically powerfully that it's not a free for all by any means. But again, for the general music teachers, sometimes loosening those parameters and just allowing those kids to define the parameters, letting them choose their own instruments from the instrumentarium or your collection rather than choosing 3 different instruments and placing that over into a pod. It's so beautiful watching the kids.
And
Yeah.
and also beautiful to me is a new term that I was not aware of, which I saw Alan nodding too. Instrumentarium. How awesome is that?
Instrumentarium. Yeah, I love it. I love it so much.
I have not heard that term. Is that a very common term, just not outside of Iowa, or is that kind of a Leela specific term?
No, no, no. I mean, the instrumentarium, gosh, I think it's an ORF term. Isn't it an
Okay.
ORF term? I don't know. It's not mine.
All right.
This is all ORF stuff. I mean, I'm very ORF influenced just in terms of allowing children to create their own music or participate at whatever level they are in some very meaningful way.
Let's shift over to music theory real quick. I'm curious, what exactly does teaching music theory mean to you? Is this the theory of music that emerged from that European conservatory tradition, or does it involve music from all over the world? Does it require reading notation? How important do you think it is that our elementary students recognize notes on a bass clef? Basically, if we're also doing
Mm-hmm.
dancing and drumming and singing and improvisation, how do we
Mm-hmm.
decide which aspects of theory to incorporate with our limited time?
I would say music theory is something that can be integrated into your program from multiple perspectives. So I don't only mean Western theory, but I do mean aspects of it. Absolutely. We live in a society where the kids are going to have to grow up and read notes and read rhythms. And ideally, it's a tool that they can get good at, just like they read in their classes and they can do math equations. Let's demystify this process of learning how to read a quarter note and eighth notes and our Western system, and let's use it. It can also mean in the Ghanaian Efwe tradition. What does it mean when I go, day, digga, day, digga, day, digga, day, digga? What are we doing at that moment? Well, it means day, digga, day, digga, day. We are throwing our arms up. That's also a theory. That's also a theory of music, that we are understanding patterns and how they work and what they mean.
So, what other cool things are you up to these days?
Currently planning our 11th Mile of Music. So, the Mile of Music Festival in downtown Appleton. It's a singer-songwriter festival that attracts 90,000 people to Appleton every summer. It's a festival of all original tunes. There are over 800 acts, over 200 bands. And what I do is I created the music education team, which is a team of about 20 educational professionals or pre-service teachers. And we create anywhere from like 35 to 50 hands-on music making events every summer. So this could be in samba, it could be singer-songwriter workshop, it could be ukulele, guitar, katak dancing. I try to uplift our local musical culture bearers. What's nice about that is that this music as a birthright idea then comes to a whole town, 90,000 attendees, and over 7,000 each year choose to participate in these hands-on music making events. So they come not to just see the music, but to also make music. And it's been lovely that over the years, the Mile of Music Festival, our hands-on music making events have encouraged several people to start taking an instrument again, grabbing the saxophone out of the closet and starting lessons again. We had one woman who wrote, after walking into a songwriting workshop, she came back the next year and handed us a CD of all original tunes that she had written. And she had never written music before in her life. So that's what's happening.
Cool.
Very cool. Alan and I have an excuse for a road trip now.
Right.
All right, Leila, we're not letting you out of here without your answers to 5 very difficult questions. Are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready for the lightning round, especially since it's raining like cats and dogs here right now.
All right. Favorite restaurant in Appleton, Wisconsin?
Madras Cafe. I have to shout out to my South Indian people.
A piece of music, composer, or performer you wish more people knew about?
Sarah Kirkland Snyder, an amazingly soulful composer. I'm a harpist, so I had a chance to play a work of hers a few years ago with some of the people here at Lawrence. And Sarah Kirkland Snyder, she's like a channeler. She channels the universe. Her stuff's gorgeous.
How about a favorite film or TV series you've enjoyed recently?
I had never seen This Is Us before. Have you seen This Is Us?
Oh, yeah.
I have not.
It just amazing. Both my husband and I think, cried every episode. And of course, Star Trek. Anything Star Trek.
The most memorable live music performance you've attended?
I have to say, I don't know if you know that my daughter played tabla, and she passed away in 2018. So for me right now, my most memorable musical performance is watching my daughter perform at the Krannert Center for the Performing Arts in Champaign, Illinois, on her tabla with a whole community of Hindustani musicians.
And finally, a book recommendation for our listeners, please.
The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Especially if we're talking about teachers not being afraid to be beginners and getting out of their comfort zone to help diversify. That book is all about the creative self and all about the person as a beginner and constant explorer throughout life.
Leila Ramagopal Pertl, thank you so much for joining us. It's been captivating. It's been captivating to hear about music as a birthright and hear the ways that we can all make that happen. It's been a joy. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Thanks for listening to Music Ed Insights.
We're supported by Group Dynamic, a leading provider of youth leadership workshops. Alan works with dozens of schools each year to help develop their leaders. Learn more at groupdynamic.net/youth-leadership.
Or you could email me at alan@groupdynamic.net. Also sponsored by the Co-College Music Education Program. They've got a website too.
Just click their link at our website or email me at shanley@coe.edu.
Also, The Normal Design, helping normal companies and people create memorable, meaningful, and professional designs and branding. More at thenormaldesign.com.
And Winterset Websites, website design and maintenance. wintersetwebsites.com.
Our Facebook page is Music Ed Insights.
Our website has program notes, links, and a one-page download of this episode's key takeaways. That's musicedinsights.com.
New episodes generally drop every couple weeks on Monday.
Get current.
Stay relevant.
Music Ed Insights.